Okay, everyone, if we can get started. Let's see if we can get our panel together, seated, and we'll get ourselves started. We have a full program this morning. I want to thank everyone for coming. On behalf of the Marin County Commission on Aging, welcome. I'm Chris Asimas. I represent San Rafael on the commission, and I also chair the Health and Nutrition Committee that is sponsoring this program. We really have a good program going. We have 4 accomplished professionals who are going to teach us about becoming more aware of cognitive deficits and mood disorder issues. Okay, what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce the 4. We have 2 seated so far. And we'll go one at a time for the presentations. They'll have 15 minutes. And then at the end, we'll have question and answers. And here's Dr. Tavano. Okay. So I'd like to introduce first Dr. Nancy Hoffman, who's a geriatric neuropsychologist who has has an expertise in witness expert services with the cases in, I guess, courts having to do with capacity as they relate to issues around elder aging, elder abuse, financial exploitation, etc. She also has a private practice and offers testing and evaluation of different issues having to do with dementia and how that impacts our ability, I guess, competence and ability to function. Okay, that's Dr. Hoffman. Hoffman, I'm really apologize. Hoffman, I've always said Hoffman. Hoffman, okay. Then we have Shelley Dombroski, who's Regional Director of the Northern California Alzheimer's Association. I understand she's also in charge of administrating the Alzheimer's Association in 4 counties, Marin, Sonoma, Napa, and Mendocino. Bravo. She and her staff and volunteers offer information, referrals, care consultation, support, much support to families who are dealing with various issues around dementia. Thank you. Dr. Tavano, this is Suzanne Tavano, who's a clinical psychologist, a registered nurse, and a healthcare expert. Welcome. She used to be my boss. She is currently director of the Marin County, Behavioral Health and Recovery Services, and is real pleased that what the Marin County is going for is an integrative approach to these services. She has worked with children and families. I know that she worked in Contra Costa County for many years and is currently with us in Marin County. Welcome. And then we have Julia Chu, who's a psychologist who's been in practice for many years, both in San Francisco and in the East Bay, and is currently in charge of the program called Boost that she will tell us about. Okay, welcome, ladies. We're real proud to have you, and we'll start with Dr. Hoffman.
All right. I can't sit when I talk. I like to walk around a little bit.
One more thing. We'll have questions at the end of all the 4 presentations, if that's all right with everyone.
Sure, that's fine. So thank you. I'm Dr. Nancy Hoffman. I'm a geriatric neuropsychologist, which means that I primarily work with older adults. I primarily work with older adults who have cognitive problems, dementia, have had strokes and that sort of thing. But one day a week I have a private practice where I see people for therapy. And I want to talk about late life depression, which is a very different animal than depression that people experience off and on throughout their lives. Let's see if I can. So aging brings with it a lot of challenges that people are not really prepared for. And one of the biggest challenges that happens as we age is we start to lose roles that we use to identify ourselves. When you're younger and your kids are home, you're an active parent. When your kids move out, you don't necessarily not be a parent anymore, but your parenting is less and less and less as your kids become older and more self-sufficient. When you retire, you lose the role as contractor or nurse or psychologist. Our friends die, we lose the role as somebody's child, somebody's friend, somebody's sister. And this loss is a very important part of aging. And it is very difficult for people to cope with loss. It's difficult for all of us. And the losses that come about with aging, these losses of roles, losses of friendship, losses of physical health, can lead to a late life depression. And by late life depression, I mean depression in somebody who doesn't have a history of depression from their early years on up. And oftentimes this late life depression is related to loss or related to poor physical health. When we age and when we lose our roles, we stop going to work, I'm not taking my kids to school anymore, I'm not going to my psychology practice, whatever it happens to be, if we are not replacing those roles with other roles, if we are physically unhealthy and we're more and more isolated, this can lead to a type of loneliness that people have a very difficult time coping with. And one of the reasons that I wanted to approach adult mental health from this perspective is because I think it's very important that as we go through life, we are constantly changing and redefining our roles. If you change and if you redefine your roles, you're probably not going to end up isolated and depressed. But if you do not have that sort of awareness that you need to be preparing constantly for the next stages of life, which I think characterizes most or an awful lot of people, then isolation, depression can set in. And when people are depressed, they don't do the things they need to do. I have a neighbor who's depressed. It's very hard to watch. He retired. He did not prepare for retirement. He didn't have hobbies. He didn't have interests. All of his social interactions were with his colleagues at work. And when he left work, guess what? He loses his role in the world. He loses his social interactions. He doesn't have a purpose. So his wife just told me the other day that he lays on the couch in his underwear all day, watching television and eating cookies. She's in therapy. She knows that he's depressed. She's tried to get him to go to therapy. He won't. She's tried to get him to talk to his doctor about antidepressants. He won't. He won't socialize, he won't exercise, and it's very difficult for her. It's very painful for her to watch this, but this is not an uncommon scenario, especially with men, unfortunately. And the likelihood is that he will die prematurely because of all these things, because the longer he sits on the couch, he becomes deconditioned, it's harder to walk. They have a dog. She says, why don't you walk the dog? Well, it's hard for him to even walk the dog down to the end of the block. So he's starting to lose his functional ability. And it's our functional ability that allows us to stay independent. I can get up, I can go in the backyard and pull weeds, I can drive to the store, I can use the phone, I can do all these things. And once I stop doing these things, and once I start to lose the ability to do these things, I become more isolated and I become more and more depressed. And this is what I see in my private practice when I do therapy with people. Our life is a series of choice and consequences. And if we're not self-reflective, if we're not introspective, if we're not looking at the consequences that we experience and tying them back to our choices and making different choices, things don't go very well for us. So one of the things that I think about a lot with my patients is Darwin's idea of survival of the fittest. Some people think that this means that somebody is stronger than someone else, so they're going to take them down, or they're smarter than somebody else. But really what Darwin meant by survival of the fittest is people are going to survive if they have the ability to adapt to change. And all of us are old enough to know that life is about change and life requires us to adapt. And if we cannot adapt, we are not going to do well. And that's what's happening to a lot of patients that I see. One of the other things that happens as we age is we become closer to the idea of our own mortality. We realize that there are more years behind us than there are ahead of us. And in our culture, we do not like to talk about death. We do not like to think about death. It makes us very uncomfortable. And when I was in graduate school, I was part of the Zen Hospice Project. I was a hospice volunteer, and I was trying to do my dissertation on death anxiety, and nobody would talk to me. And so I had to kind of back up. I was looking at death anxiety in terminally ill hospice patients. Not one person would talk to me. And somebody finally said to me, well, honey, you don't realize nobody's terminally ill. Nobody identifies as terminally ill. So I had to keep backing up and refining the language that I was using. And I ended up having to look at adjustment in women living with metastasized breast cancer. I had to water it down so much that I couldn't even use the term death. They told me, take the word death out of every single thing you're doing. And I did, and a couple of people were willing to talk to me. But it was very interesting to see, even though we're all mortal and we're all going to die, we really don't like to talk about it. And so if you think about that and you're getting older, you know that death is going to come for all of us sooner rather than later, but you can't talk about it, you can't think about it, you can't adapt to what's happening. Life just becomes almost unbearably difficult. So one of the things that's intriguing to me is a psychoanalyst named Erik Erikson. And what he talked about was, at the time, a very radical idea. They thought that we went through developmental stages when we were children. You know, you see your kids grow, they start to walk, they go to school, they get a job, they start to drive. So we're accustomed to thinking of development with regard to children. But what he said is, no, we develop and change at every stage of our lives. And he came up with 8 stages that he felt were appropriate and applicable to all adults. And it's the last stage that I find very interesting, and what he called it was integrity versus despair. And what he means by integrity is that people naturally do a life review as we age. We look back on our early days and we try to make sense of our lives. And if we can integrate the experiences that we've had, the choices we've made that are good, the choices we've made that are bad, the things that have gone well, the things that have gone wrong, if we can integrate all of those into our identity, we end up having a successful old age. If we can't do that, we end up in despair. So to Erikson, this is the challenge, this is the conflict of aging. Can we integrate these experiences of our lives into a whole that makes sense, that we're satisfied with, or do we just sit in despair? My neighbor who sits on the couch all day can't do this. He is in a state of despair, and it's unlikely that things are going to change for him. But I think it's really critically important for all of us that work with older adults is to be able to help people integrate the experiences of life to come up with a satisfying whole. So these are signs of depression in older adults. Most people don't walk in the room and say, I'm really depressed. People say, I'm really tired, I don't feel good. People stop eating, they can't sleep. a lot of these signs that I have up here are signs of depression in an older adult. They may not be signs of depression in someone in midlife or someone in their 20s, but in an older adult they are. Grief is not the same as depression. Someone will come into my office and say, I'm really depressed, my wife just died. Well, in likelihood, they're grieving, they're sad, which is a natural reaction to that kind of a loss. Depression is another thing altogether. It's not necessarily a natural reaction to something. So here are some statistics that I got from Marianne York, and I think that you're getting handouts on these slides, so I won't go over all of them with you. But we have a very large aging population in Marin, and we do not have enough services for everybody who needs therapy, who needs some sort of a treatment to have it. And so I think the challenge for all of us is, how do we come up with and create services for people? And given what I've just said about this need to be able to integrate the experiences of our lives with who we are today, I think we need to be more creative about how we offer services, because traditional therapy isn't necessarily appropriate or doesn't necessarily cover what needs to be covered if you think about what I told you about this last stage with Erickson. So here is some of it. The challenge to me is, how do we be creative? So thank you.
Okay, let's see how fast Michelle can do this. Well, thanks for having me this morning. So I'm going to talk a little bit, Dr. Hoffman was just talking about service programs and services for families. So I thought I would talk a little bit about what we're doing here for family caregivers in Marin County. But first I want to start off by a couple months ago, the 2017 Alzheimer's disease facts and figures report was released. So I want to show a short clip about some of the statistics that are happening across the nation. So a lot of facts, Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. Some of the facts: 6th leading cause of death in the U.S. 1 in 3 seniors die of Alzheimer's disease or related dementia. Right now there's 5 million Americans living with it. By 2050 that's going to triple to close to 16 million. 15 million Americans provide unpaid care, and 35% of caregivers report declining health, those caring for people with Alzheimer's, compared to 18% of caregivers caring for somebody without dementia. I think really interesting, since 2000, deaths from heart disease decreased 14%, while deaths from Alzheimer's disease increased 89%. All the more important reason why we have to invest in research funding. We're underfunded. We've seen the success when you put money towards funding for other diseases like cancer and heart disease, $6 billion, $4 billion. We just reached the $1 billion this year, and we're in Washington, D.C. asking for another 411 million. So hopefully we've been making great strides in trying to get that research funding. In California, it's the 5th leading cause of death. 610 Californians. It's expected to increase 38%. So some other facts. But I really wanted to kind of go more specific to Marin County. We're happy that finally they came out with a county data report. I put some handouts in the back, but it shows currently in 2015 there were close to 58 people 65 and older in Marin County living with Alzheimer's disease. That's expected to double in the next 15 years. But this report was really interesting because they also separated those individuals living with Alzheimer's by race. We're close to 1,100 Latinos in Marin County living with Alzheimer's, 126 African Americans, and 579 Asian Pacific. So if you look at the Latino numbers compared to the total in Marin, it's 18% of people living in Marin County with Alzheimer's disease, 65 and older. 18% of those are Latinos. So as a chapter, we, part of our strategic plan under diversity and inclusion, we're really making a targeted focus on Latino families. I'm happy to say, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we've been doing, but over the last 3 years, we got a small amount of hours to hire a Latino outreach specialist to really kind of target those families and provide the education and support that they need. So we're happy to be able to do that. So we are fortunate, and this is probably, I may be wrong, but I think at least in Northern California, we have a collaborative grant. It's funded through the Marin County Division of Aging. It's 8 agencies that have come together. We're in our 11th year. I didn't think we would actually come together in the beginning, right, Jim? But we sat down because the county really wanted us to come up with an array of programs and services that 8 agencies can deliver together. And so what we did, we kind of put it down a piece of paper. We wrote down what our strengths were in each organization, and then brought those services. We didn't want to duplicate services across the different agencies. So we wanted to provide assistance to family caregivers, adult family members, spouse, partner, et cetera, through support, education, and respite care. And a caregiver providing assistance to either an older individual or to an individual with Alzheimer's at any age. So here are the 8 of us. The Alzheimer's Association, we administer the grant, and there's handouts on the back that have these brochures, and feel free to take some. The other 7 agencies are Family Caregiver Alliance, Lighthouse of Marin, Lifelong Medical Care, Marin Adult Day Health, Jewish Family and Children's Services, Senior Access, Spectrum LGBT Center, and West Marin Senior Service. So those services, we want people to get help when they need help. That's the important thing. We want to be able to provide these grant funds. We're almost out. It's close to the end of the fiscal year. It will be funded again July 1st. So the first thing is access assistance. So through outreach and information, and this is where it's going to test my memory. Outreach and information and assistance, that's provided by the Alzheimer's Association Family Caregiver Alliance, West Marin Senior Service, and I think that's it. Support services in way of access and case management, that's done by Family Caregiver Alliance and West Marin Senior Service. The Alzheimer's Association and Jewish Family and Children's Services provide counseling. We provide some support groups, and Family Caregiver Alliance provide caregiver training. Respite care, so important, and we have a large pot of this grant that goes to respite care in-home, provided by Jewish Family and Children's Services and West Marin Senior Service. Senior Access and Marin Adult Day Health provide the day care services and overnight care. So when families come to us and they don't know where to turn, and they talk with Shannon Speaker, our family care specialist, who's here, about, I'm exhausted, my health is at issue, what can I do? We can actually pick up the phone and call Jewish Family and Children's Services, or we can call Senior Access, and we can provide vouchers so family members can get free services. And sometimes that's what they need, making that first step. Oh, I don't know if I can afford it, but if you can kind of begin and it's paid for, hopefully it will continue. So we're really proud of this grant, and thank you to the Marin County for pushing us all together. We're going into our 12th year. And in way of what we do for the Alzheimer's Association, I would say our number one service is our 24/7 helpline. So morning, noon, or night, you can call. You can call if you have a question. You can call if you're dealing with a difficult behavior. You can call at 2 in the morning if you just want somebody to talk to and you can't sleep. There's somebody always there on the other end of the line. When Shannon gets into the office on Monday after a long weekend, we have a list of everyone that's called through the weekend. Maybe they need a follow-up call. Maybe they need a one-on-one consultation with Shannon, and she will follow up with that person. And in way of care consultations, that's what her role is, meeting with families, talking about short-term goals, long-term goals, what are their needs, what kind of services can she provide. And then our Latino outreach, I mentioned that. Holly Rylance is our Latino outreach specialist. We provided, in way of community education through a Title IIIB outreach grant, we provided probably close to 45 to 50 programs this last fiscal year. 6 of them were in Spanish, and they were on topics like healthy aging, memory loss, Alzheimer's disease, caregiving strategies. And so through those programs, Holly's made some great connections with a lot of Latino families. So as part of going into her second year, we decided to do our first Latino education forum. We had no idea if anyone was going to show up. It was in Petaluma. We wanted to pull from Marin and Sonoma. Actually, we had a lot of Marin County families that came. 75 Latino caregivers came to this conference. We were thrilled. A half day of education. We had great food. We had some music. It was a great morning. And we're planned on doing it again, and hopefully bigger and better. We offer 5 caregiver support groups specific to wives, husbands, adult children, and we even have one stage-specific, mid to late stage, for spouses and partners. I'm thrilled to say our early stage program, that's a support group designed for the person with an early stage diagnosis and their care partner. They come together, but they meet separately with trained facilitators. Marianne York in the back leads our group for the person with the diagnosis. And with an early stage diagnosis, they're in that group for quite a long time. So they form bond, they have this incredible friendship, support system, and it's a treasure to watch. And we're actually, that program in our chapter was one of the first. It's going on about its 15th year. So it's a program. We also have 2 up in Santa Rosa, and we started one in Napa. So the need is there. We try not to have a wait list, but sometimes it's hard. But if it gets long enough, we'll start another group. Medical Alert Safe Return. Safe Return program is a bracelet. We partnered with Medical Alert, and it says 60% of people with Alzheimer's will wander at some point. So it's a bracelet. I'm memory impaired. To help John call this 800 number, there's an ID number. If the person's missing, we will get a call. We're not going to go out and search, but we can provide telephone support to the caregiver while their loved one is missing, and then follow up afterwards once they're home safely to say, hey, how can we help you? You want to get into a support group, you know, and Shannon can sit one-on-one with that person. Trial match. Anybody involved in a clinical trial? We need people to oh, Shannon. We need, you know, so we have, you know, we need more research funding, of course, but we also need individuals to participate in clinical trials. Healthy individuals, caregivers, people with an early stage diagnosis. Years ago, you used to have to, you know, pull up your computer and go clinicaltrials.gov. Now you call us, you say, how far can you travel? We will do the research for you, send you a list, no guarantee, but then you can kind of know what's happening in your area. And then public policy and advocacy. I remember my first time going to Sacramento, I was really nervous, like, well, I don't know. But, you know, I have my own story. My sister-in-law was diagnosed at 53, so I could kind of go in there as a staff person, but a family member going through this experience. Really nervous. Well, I'm not nervous anymore. I march right in there. I just went to Washington, D.C. for my 4th year. But with the soaring number, we need to make our federal government act. So we go in, we're asking for more research funding. We're so fortunate in Marin County to have a strong supporter in Congressman Hoffman. We have a team that goes in and sees him probably every other month. And what do you want me to do? What do you want me to sign? And he's right there with us. He actually is one of 2 congressmen that sent a personal letter to the Health and Aging Commission that we needed research funding of another $411 million. A lot of them didn't want to do that. They wanted to sign a group letter, but he sent his own personal letter, which was a huge achievement. So our goal, number 1, is to find a cure and effective treatment, but it's also to eventually just imagine coming and seeing the first survivor of Alzheimer's.
The first person to survive Alzheimer's disease is out there. They're going to hold on to everything the disease steals away. That smile they can't hide. That dance class they love. Every single piece of them is going to make it through. And the Alzheimer's Association is going to make it happen by funding research, advancing public policy, and spurring scientific breakthroughs. And by providing local support to those living with the disease and their caregivers, we're easing the burden for all those facing it until we accomplish our goal. Alzheimer's disease has devastated millions of lives, but that's all going to change when we reach the first survivor. But we won't get there without you. Visit alz.org to join the fight.
And lastly, I just want to, I know this June is Alzheimer and Brain Awareness Month. So to end on a light note, there's a handout, 10 ways to love your brain. You know, we really know that we, as we age, need to incorporate healthy habits in our lifestyle. So here's kind of 10 things: exercise, making sure you sleep, learning something new. So kind of look at the handout and try in the month of June to do one thing every day and to keep your, kind of to maintain a brain healthy lifestyle. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I don't have a PowerPoint, and I'm not going to stand. I'm going to stay seated. And first wanted to say hi to my very, very old friend, Dr. Meredith, and prior boss. So, yay, thank you. And I guess the fact that we've known each other for almost 40 years is an indication that we're members of the older adult group. So we're here with everybody. And also want to take note that the supervisor of our HOPE program is here with us, so if she wants to jump in at any point, I really invite her to do so. So I would preface what I'm going to say by saying this. I am in no way an expert in the treatment of dementias and Alzheimer's, and you'll understand that a bit more as I go along and talk here. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that when I speak, I'm really speaking from the public sector perspective. I really live in the Medicare world, not the world of commercial insurance and HMOs, et cetera. So when I make my statements, if you could put it within that context, I'm really talking about the public system, not the private system, in addressing the mental health needs of older adults. So I feel like I always have to start out, and I know some of you have heard me go through this before, but those of you who haven't, I feel like I always want to start out with an apology that we can't do more. But I want to explain why it is that behavioral health and recovery services, which is the community public sector plan, can't do more in addressing Alzheimer's and dementias. And it really goes to our contracts with the State Department of Healthcare Services. So I want to start there to just sort of frame things out about who we serve, why we serve them, how we serve them, and why we frequently say, sorry, we can't serve your family member, because it's very hard for us when we say that, and hope to build some understanding about why that is. So we operate under 3 major contracts with the State Department of Healthcare Services. One of them is to operate the Drug Medi-Cal program in the County of Marin. The other is the Mental Health Services Act, Prop 63, and I'll say a few more words about that. But really our largest contract and central contract is our contract to be the managed care entity for specialty mental health services in Marin County. So the feds and the state have done an amazing job of siloing so many different components of the healthcare industry that it's really hard to navigate sometimes. And even if we just talk about mental health benefits, they've actually even divided mental health benefits. So persons with mild to moderate mental health needs would receive their Medi-Cal services through Partnership Health, which contracts with Beacon Health. Behavioral Health and Recovery Services, our contract is for specialty mental health services. So that means serving people with serious to severe mental health diagnoses. And that becomes something of an issue in and of itself, because mental health should be mental health, but then there's this determination of mild to moderate versus serious to severe. So there's a cutoff even within the mental health field, which is hard for people in the community to navigate sometimes. But in terms of our part of the world, specialty mental health, the state in the 90s, when they moved Medi-Cal mental health benefits to a managed care model. We are a managed care entity. We're subject to all the federal managed care rules, et cetera, et cetera. And believe me, it's all very boring information that I'm not going to even get into here, but just to remind everyone that we are considered a managed care entity and subject to all the federal and state regulations about that. And it's those regulations that really keep us in a pretty narrow lane in terms of who we can serve and how we can serve them. So to qualify for our mental health services, which are, again, specialty mental health services, not general mental health services, the state in the 90s developed a list of included diagnoses and excluded diagnoses and said, specialty mental health, county mental health plans, these are the diagnoses that you can address. And when they did that, they very explicitly put dementias, Alzheimer's, and other neurocognitive illnesses on the excluded list. So that set the bar right there. So And then they gave us a list of the included diagnoses, and they're the ones that you would think of in terms of schizophrenia, different psychotic conditions, major depression, adjustment disorders, trauma-related incidents, et cetera, et cetera. So they basically, from the start, made a very sharp distinction between what they considered our purview under mental health and what they considered out of our purview. So when they come and visit us and audit us, they look to see if we've crossed that line at all. So we always have to be very careful about where that line is. So that's one component of it. The other is given our contracts, our primary focus, our primary target population are Medi-Cal beneficiaries, but then also persons who are dual eligibles and have both Medi-Cal and Medicare. So that's our target population, not the Medicare-only population, which is really challenging, particularly in the county of Marin, where a significant number of people do have Medicare only and don't also have Medi-Cal. So that introduces some challenges to access to care. So I don't want to go too far down that line. I'll go back to our medical necessity criteria. So there has to be the included diagnoses. And then in addition, there have to be some other things, that there have to be significant areas in functioning in general life functions. But also we have to be able to attest that the person would be able to benefit from the types of services that we have to provide. So those are the medical necessity criteria. That's what sets the stage in terms of who we can serve and who we can't serve. So Medi-Cal, Medicare beneficiaries, and those who meet these very stringent criteria about specialty mental health services. So it really creates barriers to care to the community, not simply because we don't serve the private sector, but also even within the Medi-Cal population, we're not allowed to serve all of the Medi-Cal population because of these restrictions I just talked about. So I'm not here to do a doom and gloom thing, but I really wanted to set the stage a little bit and kind of demystify a very mystifying system, to tell you the truth. So I'm just speaking from the specialty mental health standpoint, and before I go on there, want to say that in terms of the public sector, probably originating at the federal level, but certainly at the state level, it's really been amazing in a not positive way of how the state has approached the neurocognitive disorders, because it's for Medi-Cal beneficiaries, a very divided benefit, let's say. So there is no explicit mental health benefit for someone who is diagnosed with a neurocognitive disorder, dementia, Alzheimer's. The managed care plan, so in our county, Partnership Health, is responsible for the physical health care of persons with Medi-Cal, including those with those diagnoses. But they are not necessarily responsible for care that's needed that's really very strictly related to the condition of Alzheimer's or other dementias. So if the person has physical health conditions that require physical health intervention, including skilled nursing facility, then that's considered a medical benefit that's managed through Partnership Health. So in terms of, again, the mental health benefit, there isn't an explicit benefit available. And then we get into a lot of other complicating issues because people fall through the cracks. And though we are specialty mental health, what we're finding is, as is representative of the Marin community, Marin has the largest growing percentage of older adults. And so you can then assume that the people that we've been serving in specialty mental health, as we've been serving them for years and as they're aging, they also are developing different cognitive disorders, neurocognitive disorders. And so what we need to do is be very careful, because we're only supposed to treat the mental health condition. And so it's really walking this fine line about what is a mental health condition and what is part of a dementia. And when we diagnose we're very careful that our primary diagnosis is a mental health condition that includes one of the diagnoses on the included list. We sometimes include the neurocognitive disorder as a secondary diagnosis, but we don't always. And this is a real dilemma because we do assess and we do identify and we do diagnose. We don't always indicate it in the medical records for a couple of reasons. One is when the state comes to audit us, if they see dementia or Alzheimer's, their red flags go up immediately. So then they're really looking to prove that we're not serving a mental health condition, we're serving a neurocognitive. So that's one reason that makes us kind of shy about doing that. The other is it is stigmatizing enough to be diagnosed with a serious mental illness. But if you are diagnosed with a serious mental illness and Alzheimer's or dementia, accessing all of the appropriate levels of care become almost impossible. So even though we are saying that we're primarily treating the mental health condition, we can't ignore the neurocognitive decline that's going on. And it's not uncommon that people we're serving as they age and develop all these varieties of conditions also need long-term care, oftentimes locked long-term care, which are the IMDs and the mental health rehab centers and so forth. And once one of those facilities sees an included diagnosis of dementia, it makes the admission of that person twice as hard as if they just had the serious mental health diagnoses. So there are all of these challenges that we're all facing, and at some point, I think it's all of us getting together because the advocacy, at least on the public side, really needs to happen at the state level, that no one is clearly responsible for the treatment of these conditions. So that said, it gets very complicated, whether it's finding housing for a person with both diagnoses, finding a long-term facility. But what we also find is when people are in need of emergency psychiatric hospitalization, and it is for their psychiatric condition, many hospitals will deny our admission request because we've also indicated the presence of dementia. So there is stigma, there is discrimination, there are federal and state rules that make providing appropriate care very challenging in this area, particularly when you put serious mental illness together with neurocognitive disorders. So wanted to put that out there. So we always have to say that our primary focus of treatment is the mental health condition. So that's what we work very hard to do. Because we don't always include the diagnoses of dementia, we can't I cannot right now accurately tell you of all of the older adults we're serving who also have a concurrent disorder of neurocognitive disorder. And I have to say, also struggled with this around substance use issues, because up until recently, if the state saw us as specialty mental health serving someone who had a mental health condition and a substance use issue, if it in any way looked as if we were addressing the substance use issue, they would disallow us and we couldn't claim Medi-Cal for all those services. So we got past that one on the drug and alcohol side, where we've now trained all of our staff on assessment and diagnosis of substance use disorders. And this is the next frontier that we'll have to take on, because what I would add here is, with the exception of these folks and some of you out there, really most mental health professionals are not trained in the treatment of neurocognitive disorders. They might be trained in the assessment diagnosis of, but not in the treatment of. So we have a community mental health system that was structured on the groundwork that thou shalt not treat neurocognitive disorders. And that's true throughout the state. And then that creeps into the training programs, where there isn't a lot of focus on treating older adults in general, but particularly on treating neurocognitive disorders. So we have a lot of stuff that we need to work on together to really straighten out collaboratively. It's going to take all of us. So what I would say is that the one exception that we have is under the Mental Health Services Act because it's not subject, parts of it are not subject to all of the Medi-Cal kind of thinking. So under the Mental Health Services Act, under prevention and early intervention, that's the one place where we could be more population-based regardless of insurance, unlike our planned ongoing services. So under the Mental Health Services Act, is there anybody here from Jewish Family and Children's Services? Yes, I know you are. I was wondering if anyone else is. So that's really our one opportunity. It's under prevention, early intervention to provide funding for services to really help older adults. Would like to expand that and hope in the future, particularly under, the Mental Health Services Act is divided into components. So under prevention, early intervention, we're looking at ways of expanding the capacity there. And we're hoping that in the near future, we'll be able to do an innovative project focused on older adults. And then again, we don't have to stick strictly with the Medi-Cal population, but that's, probably a couple of years, maybe a year or two down the line. So, so in general, who do we serve of the older adult population in Marin? And so the mental health side of behavioral health in 2016 served about 500 older adults. So our definition of older adults is the state's definition, which is 60 plus. In Marin, there are about 5,500 Medi-Cal beneficiaries who are older than 60. So when you do the math, we're serving about close to 9% of the Medi-Cal population, which doesn't sound great, but when you compare it to the statewide average, which is 2.9%, I think you'll see that Marin has actually been making an effort to really reach out and expand our services to older adults. And how do we serve older adults? Really throughout our entire system of care. I think people tend to think that the only older adults that we serve are in the HOPE program. That's not the case, obviously, since we serve 500 people in 1 year. The HOPE program, which is a specialty intensive program for persons over 60 with serious mental health. We serve about 40, there are about 40 enrollees in that program. And then as many of you probably know, and maybe some of you are our senior peer counselors. Any of you in the house? Thank you so much, because our senior peer counselors are amazing and wonderful, so thank you so much. Probably are supporting another 10 to 15 people. So you, oh, up to 45. Well, thank you for the update, and that's amazing because, those of you who know me, I really have a strong orientation to recognizing the value of people with lived experience, whether that lived experience is having been treated for a mental health issue, a substance use issue, or if you're an older adult. Because if you have that lived experience, you're going to bring a very different perspective to the work that you do. So thank you, senior peer counselors, and thank you for really expanding who you're reaching out to. That's wonderful. So, so really the remainder of the people we're serving are throughout the system. And about 17% of the services we provided in 2016 were services to persons 60 years and older. And when we looked at the data for the number of people who are going to what used to be called the psychiatric emergency service, which are people who are really in emergency need, it's now called the crisis stabilization unit. We're finding that about 17% of the people accessing services at the crisis unit are older adults, 60 and over. So those are really, I think, some significant numbers, and I think they really do in many ways reflect the fact that Marin really stands out in the number of older adults in the community and that growing number. So, so again, I think I just want to again go back to the challenges that I started out with, access to residential living, places for people to live, access to hospital care when it's needed, access to long-term care when it's needed, and sort of all the steps away. Again, mental health diagnosis in and of itself presents challenges. If you add a neurocognitive disorder to that, it becomes next to impossible. We try to do a lot of creative thinking when people need long-term care. And so that's the other part of it. It's this division of benefits. So unless the person with neurocognitive disorder has physical health conditions that are of such an extent that they qualify for a skilled nursing facility, there's not access to the skilled nursing facility. But also, similarly, just as we can't easily access long-term mental health treatment programs because of the neurocognitive disorder diagnoses, we often can't access facilities for people with Alzheimer's and dementias because of the mental health diagnoses. So that's what we do. We juggle, we finagle, we try to wiggle here and there, and that's what we do. And what I would say is people who are working with older adults, going to the point about Erickson's stages of life and so forth, are really, we do, given the number of older adults that we serve, experience a fair amount of death in the population that we're serving. And I'm sorry?
Some ladies were just saying that it seemed to make it more personal information for us. It's really detailed this way.
Yeah.
And it's kind of I know it's complicated.
Yeah.
In my experience, I wanted it to be a more personal kind of thing, approach of how to deal with an actual situation that you're in.
And I'm really sorry about that because I wasn't really clearly oriented to the focus of the presentation, so I'm sorry that I didn't come prepared to do that. But no, I appreciate your comments and certainly would want to include that. And in fact, I might call on our HOPE representative here to talk a bit more about that. But what I do want to say is that the HOPE program in particular, because there is death and dying among the people we're serving, that the way that they as a group really approach it is they have a celebration of life, I think monthly, to really think about the people they've been serving and so forth, and really frame their life in a positive perspective. So I'm sorry that I didn't do what you were just asking for, but I feel like I need to stop right now so the next speaker can go on, and promise to come back and do the more personal discussion next time.
Good morning. Does this work? Good morning. Well, you know what? It just happened that I was going to get more personal, given all these expertise on the panel here. Oh, Dr. Hoffman's left. So I'm not going to repeat a lot of things I was going to talk about, but I'm going to talk about a little bit my personal experience with the kind of folks that we all know. So let me introduce, I'm Julia. I've been doing this for about 30 years, and both in East Coast and West Coast, and now I'm in Marin for the last 10, and thanks to the county, I've been able to be in charge of this Boost program, which is a public-funded program, but we also serve a lot of private clients too, because we do serve all folks with all level of income and all kind of background. Is this clear? This is better? Much better. Again, I'm Julia, and nice to meet you all. And I have seen a lot of partners here, Marianne, Anna, Jane, Rachel. So it takes a village, and you all are my partners. Shannon, of course, and before that was Diane. I say it takes a village to help a senior stay in the home. And our goal is to help a senior stay as long as they can, independently. As I leave here today, I'm going to visit my client here. She lives right down the street here. 94-year-old, brilliant, professional man who last November he fell. Before then, he was driving himself all kinds of social activities and loved to hear himself talk. And we all know those, right? And he is so with it. I had to be on my toes when I'm with him. He catches me when I'm off. He's a scientist, but he read my doctoral presentation, which I did 20, 30 years ago. I'm a psychologist. I don't know what he was doing reading my doctoral dissertation, my subject anyway. But anyway, he's so brilliant. But he hasn't left his home since last November, Veterans Day, the day he fell. He said he's scared to go out because he doesn't trust himself anymore. How come I hear an echo? You guys hear an echo? Is this better? Yeah, this is much better. Oh, I distract myself too much. Now, I'm going to speed up because I know our time is limited, but I speak so fast anyway, so please raise your hand if I'm going too fast. But anyway, this gentleman, he was referred, he's very smart because he always called my name. That's how he remember who I am. He's in every sentence my name on it. He's like, oh, so you're here to meet Julia? And then like, Julia? So that's how he recall who's visiting him. And he has a catheter, and he's had to have a urine bag. And that's why he wouldn't go out. He's embarrassed, he said. People see him in different light. So my job is to try to engage him. He never needed therapy before because he knows more than anybody else. But when I go see him, I don't talk about therapy. I talk about this is your last stage of life. You know, you and I know that he's waiting for you upstairs. He's not ready for you yet, but when he calls you, what are you going to do? He said, I wouldn't mind not waking up at night, because I hear so often in my, I don't want to die yet, but I don't know how to live anymore. I would not mind not getting up in the morning, but I wouldn't kill myself. But it'd be sure nice. I'm so tired of living. I'm so tired of taking care of myself. One of my clients told me, I feel like Mrs. Patches. I said, why? Because he said, every time I go to a doctor, I fix this part and that part goes wrong. I fix this part, that part goes wrong. And they just patch me together with duct tape. That's what I feel like. So she called herself Mrs. Patches. But you know, this woman, I mean, they have such a great sense of life and humor and dignity about life. I really was humbled when I meet these folks and what they endure. And they endure a lot. You all know that. So this gentleman, when I visited him, we talk about, so what do you want in the last stage of your life? We have a number of years. It could be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. It could be 2 months or 2 weeks. How do you want to live this last stage of your life? You have choices. How do you want to choose to live? And that's why I work with them. And this gentleman, well, you know, I finally went outside. I walked around the block with my caregiver last week. I said, did you really? How did it feel? He said, I felt good, but you know what? It's a halo effect. When I come back in, I still feel nervous, anxious. And I think depression that Dr. Hoffman talked about, a component of that is anxiety. The anxiety of what we call perceived threat versus real threats. You either fight, you flight, or you freeze. For a lot of these older folks, they freeze. They don't think there's a future that they are. They tell me 2 things they worry about the most. Unpredictability, which means falling. They don't know how they fell. They don't know why they fell, so they are falling again because they can't prevent it from falling. The second they think they worry about is losing your memory. They hear about all this dementia, Alzheimer, on all this public television, and they worry every time they forget something. Oh my gosh, I have dementia. That means Alzheimer. That means, like A to Z. All of a sudden, between the consequences so severe, they get stuck. They feel trapped, and they feel so helpless and out of control. That unpredictability is what gets them anxious at night. Someone tells me when the morning when I wake up, my mind just spinning. I can't stop it. It just spins. I said, to what? Oh, to everything that can go wrong. I said, You know, I've been told once, you can worry about 10 minutes, you can worry about 10 weeks, you can worry about 10 years. The outcome's still the same. You don't change outcome by worrying. You change outcome by acting, right? He said, yeah. I said, well, you know, you see, you can spend all your life worrying because nothing can change, but what you can do can make you change. And what you do is how, I have some tools that I was going to go to, but might not be able to do that. The other thing is irrelevance. They said, I feel I'm not important anymore. I don't fit anywhere. I used to fit into my social circle, but a lot of my friends passed on. I used to have a role in my family's life, but all my grandkids are grown or my children are so busy, and they have their life their own. And I don't feel relevant, that nothing in this society I fit in anymore. And that adds on to the anxiety and the sense of who would miss me if I'm gone. And this is what happened to a lady I saw last year. She passed away. She actually checked herself into 7A in psych MGH quite frequently because she 6, 7 years ago, her only son, her only child, committed suicide in the house. You never know it, because she's so friendly, charming, and she never would tell anybody what happened. People don't know that part about her life. She's just such a delightful person, but so much pain she lives with. She had a horrible marriage. She lost all her family, so she's pretty much on her own. But yet she managed, she survived. When she feel really cannot handle it, she check herself, she call herself to emergency, said, I need to come in. And they let her come in, and she would do a couple of days of mission there, and she'd come back out, and she would try again. But then last few years she fell a few times. She had a major heart attack, and she didn't think she would make it anymore. And she said she loved to decorate Christmas. Christmas, she decorate her house with beautiful, when I walk in there, it's like a Christmas land. But nobody ever come to a house for Christmas. So part of my work with her was that we have a volunteer program that we bring chicken super, and we have family that like to visit homebound elderly. So this family went to visit her with their kids, and they stayed, and she had a chance to show up Chris' house to this family of young children, her Christmas house. And this is what she said. She remembered for weeks and months afterward. Every year she asked me, are they coming back? Unfortunately, she didn't make it last year. She had another major heart attack and she passed. But this is the kind of brave, we're not talking about frail elderly. They are frail, physically they're frail, but emotionally they're so strong, so much for us to learn from, and it's humbling for us to be there and listen to their history. So this man I'm gonna work with, you know what I'm gonna do? Part of my going to home visit, I do home visit. I don't think many people in this county do home visit who do Medicare, and I'm a psychologist. So I do home visit to engage them. What I do is that, I said, you know what? I'd love to see you more often. You like to see me more often, but I can only come out once every 2 weeks the most. Why don't you come and see me? We have a van that can pick you up. If you're a client, we have a van that can pick you up, and we can bring you to see me, and that way I can see you more regularly, and that's how I get them out of the house. And they do come. They come in wheelchairs, they come in walkers. We have a van that we can pick them to our office. And that's a little behavior changes that we can help them empower themselves, take something back on their own life. They are therefore in control. They don't have to be so dependent. The thing they always tell me, I hate to be dependent on my children. I hate to be a burden to anybody. And I'm living too long. And they always say, I'm living too long. And it's so sad when they are your parents. I can go on and on, I've done some of these stories, but I know our time's running out. And the idea I left you was 80. 80 is a magical number. I see a lot of people between 60, 70. When they hit 80, I see a lot of people in 90s. I've got a couple of cases now in 95, 94, 92. When they hit 80s, that number really makes them worry about, then what? I can't afford to live longer. This one woman tell me, if I live more than 5 years, I would be running out of money. 5 years all I have, I would die within 5 years because then I don't have money to pay property tax and I can't afford assisted living. What do I do then? So it's not gloom. I don't want to sound all gloom and bloom because there are things we can do. And I like to say that a woman who's visually impaired, she was used to be a dynamite. I think somebody would know her. I mentioned her here. She's quite well known. She told me once, I learned something from her. She said, you know what? I said, she cannot see, she's incontinent, but her spirit is so magnificent. I said, how do you do it? I'm learning from you because I enjoy your being here. So by being here helps a lot. It's like a touchstone for her. She knows that when we talk, I give her hope and she gives me ideas. So I see myself like little joy in life. I don't measure little happiness in the long term. A little joy, little nugget of joy. I love chocolate. So every day I think a little nugget of joy that I allow myself to feel. And that's how I get through every day. I get up and think of 1 or 2 nuggets of joy. Could be my grandchild, could be I get to go out to water a flower today. The little nugget of joy is what I keep doing, I give myself so I can keep going and see each day as it is and live the day. As they say, pain in life is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So with that, I just want to, can we just go past the tools, maybe 10 screen to it? No, I had to click it. with Daddy. No, I'm going to click to, okay, some days, why it's not going forward? Why don't you go forward, Michelle? I'll tell you when to stop. I'm holding it wrong? Oh, like this. See, that's why I can get technology challenge. Okay, so these are some of the cognitive distortion that we think about, and I help, what I can, and how to help them restructure their thoughts. A lot of them is changing the tape, self-talk, why everything is so bleak, and how do you learn how to use some of these tools, okay? And that's how we tend to see life. We don't focus on the present enough, and my job is to help them open the present, so you live for the moment, the mindfulness theory. Okay, I got a lot more, but we're gonna have to do it another time. Thank you so much.
Can we do a round of applause for all of our presenters? And I'm sorry that Dr. Hoffman left. We will take a few minutes for question and answer, but first of all, I want to acknowledge Marianne York helped put this together initially. Marianne, thank you. Thank you very much. There's information and handouts over on the table. Also, there's a sheet where if you can write in your name and email, if you're interested in the PowerPoints, for those who had PowerPoints, you can get a copy and we'll email it to you. Thank you for coming, and I hope that we have a better understanding of cognitive deficits, cognitive disorders, mood disorders, and what some of our services and our service providers in this county are all about. Thank you, ladies. Marianne?
Hi, everyone. I just thank you, everyone. And I want to say that a couple years ago, a lot of people in this room got together and we looked at common behaviors for people with cognitive issues and mental health issues. And we came up with a great 3-hour training program. Shannon was one of the leaders of it. We still have it available to you. But we also came out with this great little resource which has common behavioral issues, whether people have cognitive issues or mood issues, and how to approach them, and resources in the county. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that we had this great resource here. So please take one. It's good for everyone. We created it for everyone in the county who works with older adults or has a neighbor who's an older adult.
I just wanted to ask about that because I spoke with our police department about it and I raved about it when I went to the presentation, and I wanted to see where we could get a supply for everybody in the police department locally.
You know, we really need to talk to the Aging Action Initiative about disseminating them, and that's probably the next plan, next goal that we have. But we need to disseminate.
And if I could piggyback on that a little bit, because we're doing a lot of crisis intervention training with all variety of law enforcement people, park rangers, et cetera, highway patrol. So this would be, and we try to include some portion on distinguishing this from that, so this would be really helpful as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll work with Aging Action Initiative. One of the commissioners said that she gave it to her local banker, and it was invaluable. I gave it to someone at a retirement community who's at the reception desk, because frequently people don't know how to deal with behaviors. So this gives you some tips. We worked hard on it. Okay, 5 minutes for questions and answers. Does anyone have a burning question?
Yes, I'm Alan Bortel. I want to commend Dr. Tavano for clarifying with us of the state's resistance to dealing with Alzheimer's. I think it's a crime, particularly when, 45% of us will get Alzheimer's at age 85, and we have a very aging population. You mentioned the PEI and the innovation sections of the Mental Health Services Act. In a report that I saw recently, it was done last year by the state on the MHSA funds, where we know $2 billion are coming in a year, and that will stay up because the stock market has stayed up. And that's the Prop 63, the millionaires' 1% tax. I certainly am glad to see that you see some way of getting some of those funds into something to do with Alzheimer's and dementia in this county. I would hope that MHSA could go beyond that 5% and 10% segment. One's 10 and one's 5, I believe, of the PEI and the prevention, early intervention, and what the other one is. It looks like we'll have $2 billion has been coming in, and they've been spending $1.5 billion. So, where we've been getting about 10 to 12 million a year in Marin, I'm expecting that to go up commensurately. So maybe we'll get 15 or 16, and you'll have a lot more to work with soon. So thank you.
Thank you. There was a question.
Anyone else? We've got about 2
Any
more.
other questions?
This question is actually for both Shelley and Dr. Tavano. So the new data on Alzheimer's from Marin County, I think that's probably a gross undercount, because if mental health is not collecting, even though you're seeing some of these cases, and hospitals are not doing this, are also doing the same thing because of the misalignment and financing of healthcare. Is there a way through the backdoor channel to collect this data? Because I think we're missing a big opportunity here to really get an accurate count of the prevalence of Alzheimer's and dementia in this county.
Well, I will mention last year's facts and figures. One of the big push was that 48% of doctors that are diagnosing Alzheimer's dementia, they're not even giving the patient a diagnosis. They're leaving. So if you're leaving without a diagnosis, how are we going to capture those numbers? So a lot of our efforts locally, especially and chapter-wide, we have to do a lot more around physician outreach. This is an area we're trying to get more volunteers, because the more we can get out to the physicians, all the different diagnostic centers are doing wonderful work, and oftentimes we are referring families because they'll get a full workup and they will get a diagnosis. But sometimes there's neurologists that don't want to say Alzheimer's, or don't want to, sometimes they're just saying mild cognitive impairment, where it's really actually a dementia. And so I think we just need a better job in our chapter in Northern California to make sure we get those full diagnostic workups. But yeah.
And in the most recent, those of you who are practitioners who look at the DSM-5, that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that everybody uses for assessment and diagnosis, on the latest edition, they actually changed the term, and that's why I kept saying neurocognitive disorders. And I think it was a good attempt, but part of the thinking about that was that it would destigmatize by using that term instead of dementia and Alzheimer's. I don't know how far just changing the term is going to go towards that. And then to your point, just as we did with substance use, we are taking it on, and we will be moving towards increasing the assessment capacity of our staff and really requiring that that diagnosis be included. And then we'll just work really hard in how we frame the documentation of our services to avoid audit disallowances. I mean, the state drives a great amount of fear in us, so we just have to figure out how to work around it. But I agree with you, particularly since we're aware of it anecdotally. I can't tell you how many times I get calls either from our crisis stabilization unit or someone's in the hospital and the person needs the next level of care, and these issues come up. And without applying that diagnosis, then the person isn't going to really get all of the appropriate services also. And I think, again, and I'm just speaking very candidly here, and I think that too goes to the fact that most mental health practitioners are really not trained in neurocognitive disorders, and it's different. There are a lot of similarities when you're just looking at symptoms and approaching symptoms, but then there are a lot of differences in really what's an effective intervention or not. So I think that's what needs to be figured out more.
Thank you. We're way over time.
There's another question. Just one question real quick. How is it diagnosed now? My mother died of it in 2003. It only could be done by an autopsy of her brain. How has it been improvements in diagnosis of Alzheimer's? How is that done?
Well, especially the diagnostic centers, they say they can give about a 95% accurate diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. It's a rule out, definitely, looking at everything else that it could be. But it really is that neuropsychological testing where you sit down, not just a mini mental where you do the 30 questions, where you spend 2 to 3 hours with a neuropsychologist and paper and pencil and recall and so forth. People with Alzheimer's disease fail at certain parts of that test, and there's a pattern. So they've gotten really good about diagnosing Alzheimer's disease. 13 years ago I heard the same thing. You really don't know until autopsy, but that's changed. And also, you also want to make sure too, is it Alzheimer's disease? Could it be a reversible dementia? Could it be, oftentimes like Lewy body dementia, we're hearing more and more about that. That's often misdiagnosed as Parkinson's, but then the person has those symptoms, but they're also having hallucinations. And, the diagnostic centers can really hone in on specifically what is causing the dementia symptoms.
And to just add a personal anecdote to that, my dad died this summer. He was 99 and a half. He actually died from an auto accident, not from his health. But probably 5 years prior, he had surgery, and the anesthesia, they gave him anesthesia. There were a lot of different doctors involved. In my opinion, were not highly coordinating with each other. And all of a sudden, I was getting messages that he has dementia, that they were restraining his arms. And this was a man that was as clear as a bell, remembered everything, was golfing, was bowling at his age, and all of a sudden, he has dementia. So I went there, and I actually got every prescription that he was given, looked at them, and some of them were just, I couldn't even understand the reason for them, and I really called each doctor, including the neurologist, and challenged it and had them adjust his medication, and everything cleared. He went back to his prior level of functioning. So, I think for all of us, it's the advocacy part also. I mean, I'm part of the medical profession. I trust it, but I also have a distrust of it, so.
Yeah, family support is really important.
Thank you, everyone.